The story of Al Capone does not begin in the smoke-filled speakeasies of Chicago. It begins instead, in the crowded tenements of Brooklyn, New York. He was born on January 17, 1899, Gabriele Capone, Teresa Capone. They had come to America seeking a better life. The family was poor but hardworking. Young Alphonse grew up amid bustling streets and diverse cultures. He was a bright boy, but the strictures of the Catholic school system did not suit his restless spirit. His formal education ended abruptly. At the age of 14, he struck a female teacher and was subsequently expelled. The school doors closed, but the streets offered a different kind of education. He took on odd jobs, candy store, bowling alley. But the allure of easy money and the respect that came with it was strong. He fell in with local street gangs, Brooklyn Rippers, 40 Thieves Juniors. These were not yet the organized syndicates of his later years. They were schools of hard knocks, teaching lessons in loyalty, toughness, and the brutal arithmetic of street-level power. It was during this time that he met a man who would change the course of his life. Johnny Torrio, a sophisticated and intelligent gangster, saw potential in the young, ambitious Capone. From then on, he would be known as Scarface. He needed Al Capone. In 1920, the landscape of America was fundamentally altered by law. The 18th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, prohibiting the manufacture of intoxicating liquors, prohibiting the sale of intoxicating liquors, prohibiting the transportation of intoxicating liquors. This act, known as Prohibition, was intended to cleanse the nation of the evils of alcohol. Instead, it created the single greatest business opportunity in the history of American organized crime. In Chicago, Johnny Torrio, Capone's old mentor, saw the future. He was building a massive bootlegging empire to quench the city's insatiable thirst, and he sent a message to his protege back in Brooklyn. The time was right. Chicago was waiting. Capone arrived in Chicago around 1921. He was no longer just a street brawler, he was a young man with a purpose, ready to learn from a master. He started as a bouncer at one of Torrio's brothels, but he was a quick study. His intelligence and organizational skills were immediately apparent. Torrio was not just a gangster, he was a strategist. He taught Capone the intricacies of the business. Manage supply chains for illegal liquor, bribe police officers, bribe politicians, create a structured organization. Capone absorbed every lesson. The city of Chicago itself was a character in this drama. When Al Capone took control of the Chicago outfit in 1925, he inherited a powerful and profitable enterprise. But he was not content to simply manage it. He sought to expand it, to dominate it, to make it legendary. Prohibition was in full swing. The demand for illegal alcohol was a raging river of cash. Capone positioned himself at the center of this flow. He controlled breweries, he controlled distilleries, he controlled a massive network of truck drivers who transported the illicit goods. He supplied thousands of speakeasies, hidden bars where Chicagoans from every walk of life gathered to defy the law and have a drink. His operation was a marvel of logistics and corruption. Capone understood he had to control the city's political and law enforcement apparatus. He refined and expanded the system of bribery Torrio had established. His payroll reportedly included a majority of the city's police force, and numerous influential politicians. A phone call from Capone's headquarters could get a man released from jail. A phone call could get a court case dismissed, or get a blind eye turned to a convoy of beer trucks rumbling through the night. He made himself indispensable to the city's corrupt infrastructure. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a shadow mayor. To protect his empire, Capone commanded a private army of gunmen. They were enforcers, they were bodyguards, they were assassins. Violence was a fundamental part of his business strategy. Drive-by shootings became a terrifying signature of the Chicago gang wars. Al Capone was no longer just a gangster, he was the king of Chicago. For Al Capone, the Roaring Twenties were a golden age of immense power and staggering wealth. But this prosperity was built on a foundation of brutal, calculated violence. He saw violence not as an act of passion, but as a necessary instrument of business. It was how he maintained discipline within his own organization, and how he dealt with the constant threat of competition. The Chicago beer wars, which had begun with the murder of Dean O'Banion, raged throughout the decade. Capone's primary antagonists were the remnants of the North Side Gang led by Jaime Weiss, and later by George "Bugs" Moran. These were not men who would be easily intimidated. The cycle of violence was relentless and public. In September 1926, the North Side Gang staged one of the most audacious attacks on Capone himself. A motorcade of nearly a dozen cars drove slowly past Capone's headquarters at the Hawthorne Inn in Cicero, a suburb he effectively owned. They unleashed a torrent of over 1,000 rounds of machine gun fire into the building. Capone, who was having lunch at the time, was shaken but unhurt, having been pushed to the floor by his bodyguard. The attack was a brazen challenge to his authority, demonstrating that even the king was vulnerable. Capone's response was inevitable and utterly ruthless. 1 month later, October 1926, Jaime Weiss was gunned down in a carefully planned ambush across the street from Holy Name Cathedral. Capone's assassins, perched in a nearby rooming house, unleashed a hail of machine gun fire and shotgun fire as Weiss and his associates approached their headquarters. By the winter of 1929, Al Capone was the undisputed ruler of Chicago's underworld. Yet, one persistent thorn remained in his side: George Bugs Moran and the last vestiges of the North Side Gang. Moran continued to hijack Capone's liquor shipments and challenge his authority. Capone, who was spending the winter at his luxurious estate in Palm Island, Florida, decided it was time to eliminate this final threat once and for all. He wanted to deliver a blow so devastating that it would not only destroy his rivals, but also send a message of absolute terror throughout the criminal world. The plan he set in motion would become the single most infamous act of gangland violence in American history. The morning of February 14, 1929, St. Valentine's Day, was cold and bleak in Chicago. 7 men associated with the Moran gang were gathered in a garage on North Clark Street, which served as their main liquor depot. They were waiting for what they believed was a shipment of hijacked whiskey. Suddenly, a police car pulled up. 4 men got out. 2 were dressed in police uniforms. 2 were in civilian clothes. The Moran gang members, assuming it was a routine police raid, calmly lined up against the wall, dropping their weapons. It was a fatal mistake. This was not a raid. It was an execution squad, sent by Al Capone. The assassins, believed to be members of Capone's Egan's Rats gang brought in from St. Louis, opened fire with 2 Thompson submachine guns and a shotgun. In a matter of seconds, the garage was turned into a slaughterhouse. Al Capone cultivated a complex and honestly pretty contradictory public image. On one hand, he was the ruthless crime boss, the man behind the St. Valentine's Day massacre and countless other acts of violence. He was universally feared. Business owners paid him protection money out of terror. Rivals were eliminated without a second thought. The newspapers, which he both courted and manipulated, dubbed him Public Enemy Number 1. Yet there was another side to Al Capone, a side he carefully presented to the public. He saw himself not as a criminal, but as a public servant providing a product that the people desperately wanted. "I am just a businessman," he famously claimed, "giving the people what they want." He was a celebrity who attended boxing matches and horse races, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits, a fedora tilted just so. When he entered a room, people would often stand and applaud. Capone also engaged in surprising acts of public charity, which, well, further complicated his image. During the Great Depression, when millions were unemployed and starving, he opened one of the first soup kitchens in Chicago. It served 3 free meals a day to thousands of jobless men and women. To the people standing in that line, Capone was not a monster. He was a savior. He would hand out cash to people on the street and was known for giving lavish tips. This duality is what made Capone such an enduring figure. He was both a villain and, in the eyes of some, a hero. He embodied the hypocrisy of the Prohibition era. For years, local and federal law enforcement had tried to pin a serious crime on Al Capone. They could link him to murder, bootlegging, widespread corruption, but they could never make a charge stick. Witnesses were too terrified to testify, the justice system was too compromised by his influence. The St. Valentine's Day massacre created immense public and political pressure. President Herbert Hoover, frustrated, famously told his Treasury secretary, "I want that man in jail." The task fell to a small, dedicated group of federal agents who chose a new, unconventional line of attack. If they couldn't get him for murder, they would get him for money. The strategy was simple in concept, but hard in execution. Prove Capone earned vast income from criminal enterprises and failed to pay federal income tax on it. The investigation was led by 2 men. On one front, Elliot Ness and his Treasury agents, nicknamed the Untouchables for their incorruptibility. They conducted high-profile raids on Capone's breweries. While that brought publicity and pressure, the decisive battle was a quieter war fought with pencils and ledger books, not guns. The breakthrough came from the Treasury's Special Intelligence Unit, led by Frank J. Wilson. Wilson was a meticulous accountant. He spent months, even years, sifting through a mountain of seized financial records. He searched for a direct link between illegal income and Capone. The crucial evidence was a ledger detailing gambling profits from a suburban casino. It contained a notation of payments to Al. In 1931, the government indicted Capone on 22 counts of tax evasion. His trial was a national spectacle. Al Capone's prison sentence began in 1932 at a federal penitentiary in Atlanta. Even behind bars, he managed to maintain his status. He bribed guards, enjoyed special privileges, and continued to run his empire from his cell. He had a comfortable room, fine cigars, and access to information from the outside. For a time, it seemed as though he could corrupt any system, but the federal government was determined to break him completely. In 1934, he was transferred to a new, maximum-security federal prison that had just opened on an isolated rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay. It was called Alcatraz. Alcatraz was designed to be escape-proof and, more importantly, corrupt-proof. Here, Capone was no longer a king. He was just a number inmate AZ-85. The strict routine, the silence, and the isolation were a world away from the power he once wielded. His special privileges were gone. He was cut off from his gang and the outside world. His fellow inmates, many of whom were hardened criminals, did not fear or respect him. They saw him as a big shot, who was now just like them. He was once stabbed with a pair of scissors by another inmate in the prison barbershop. The man who had once ruled Chicago was now mopping floors and working in the prison laundry. The most devastating assault on Capone, however, was not from the prison system or other inmates. It came from within his own body. Years earlier, he had contracted syphilis. In the days before penicillin, the disease was untreatable, and over time it progressed to its tertiary stage, neurosyphilis. The disease began to attack his brain, leading to a slow and irreversible mental decline. His sharp, strategic mind started to unravel. He became confused, paranoid, and prone to rambling incoherently to himself. On January 25, 1947, after suffering a stroke and then pneumonia, Al Capone died. He was only 48 years old.